And I mean, this guy's like 320 pounds. I think he bench presses a bus. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not fat. I mean, this guy's a solid rock. And he says, I don't want to leave. I'm safe here.
yeah,
And I said, I go, who's gonna mess with you? I mean, you're just a titan. And he goes, Rob, I'm this big because I always want to protect myself because I was beat up as a kid and abused. And so that perception of people in our society is one thing, but when you actually like these podcasts are great. Once you start hearing the backstory, you go, wait a second. This guy doesn't want to be mean and tough. He wants to protect himself.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes.
My guest today on Truth Tastes Funny is Rob Munger. Rob is an entrepreneur who's not just facing societal issues head on, but he's also leveraging them to fuel positive change. He's the founder of Exodus Place, which champions transitional housing for homeless men. His background is in finance. He was a former Army officer, and his commitment to service overall shines through in his philanthropic work and also in the combination of philanthropy and societal influence and business, real estate, and so forth. So, Rob, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. So I'll let you tell the story of Exodus Place, and then we'll get into some of the specifics.
Well, Exodus it's a neat creation. I stopped and helped a homeless guy back in 2007. And I thought I was being the white knight. I was putting him to work. I found him, I had some housing, so I put him in housing, and I really thought I was the guy that was helping him. And ultimately, about a week later, after hearing his story, I realized God put him in my life to help me and to become a better person. And so that went from that to having him work for me for about 6 weeks, 7 weeks. And then he started drinking again. And I ended up getting him to a rescue mission and ended up being his mentor there at the rescue mission. And then ended up becoming a board member of the rescue mission. And ultimately, because I had helped lead the long-term strategic plan at the rescue mission, when the executive director abruptly resigned, they asked me to step in as an intermediate executive director.
Right.
So I went from finance, real estate development. My real estate development company did about 2,000 residential lots and commercial office buildings. And I was flipping houses before it was on TV, I tell people, and to working with the poor and disadvantaged. And at the rescue mission, there was a study done, and it said the most critical area demographic that needed help was homeless men. So I ended up, completing my time. Basically the rescue mission was going to close down. It's one of the largest in the state. And so, fortunately I was able to lead that charge to get them financially righted and stable. They're still exist today and they've grown successfully. But Exodus Place, it's the old Michigan Department of Corrections halfway house in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it was the largest in the state. It was built by private investors, then leased to the state. And then after the 15-year lease, the state said, hey, we're not going to renew the lease. So all of a sudden there's 66 partners that have this, in essence, a prison jail. It's not a really great time in 2009 to try to market this thing. So, and the rescue mission turned down a donation. We had a very wealthy foundation that was going to donate the building to the rescue mission. And at that point, I thought, hey, I was going back to just my regular commercial real estate and developing and back to my normal life. And within a couple weeks, I just had this, I call it a God appointment, where I still remember I started crying with my wife at dinner at a restaurant. And, my background's Army officer, field artillery, ground pounder, finance, entrepreneur. I'm not a woo-woo
You're not
kind
a
of,
table crier.
no, and I'm not we don't run this place like a kumbaya type of place either. I mean, um, we have a lot of data that we drive this. And so it was so unusual. And I just said, I'm supposed to do this. So with 4 homeless guys and myself, July 2nd of 2009, we started the cleaning, remodeling of Exodus Place, and it just kept growing. And now we're the largest transitional housing facility in the state, non-government, the prisons and jails are bigger than us, but we're the largest in the state. And it was just a guy with 4 homeless guys at the height of bankruptcy, foreclosure, unemployment. It was just a crazy ride at that time. And, with passion and tenacity, we got Exodus Place off the ground.
Yeah, it was an incredible time to be doing this, but in a sense, what better time, or what more crucial time, when people were finding themselves in straits that they never imagined. And so, homelessness, and unfortunately, as we know, homelessness continues to be a problem throughout the United States. And we'll talk more in a little bit about some of the plans you have beyond Michigan. But let's talk a little bit more about the spirit of your work. The idea that we as a society tend to judge one another. We don't always stop to understand what people are going through. You're right there up close with this situation. Share a little bit about what that's like.
A great lead in for that question. We all put labels on people, unfortunately. I was sharing with somebody, I had a gangbanger here. He had been in prison like 3 times, and he really became very successful here. I mean, he worked 3 jobs. So he did like a desk job here because we have a workforce development program here. And then he worked his main job during the week, and then he had a weekend job, I think, at a gas station. And I said, "Hey, it's time for you to leave." And he got real emotional. And I mean, this guy's like 320 pounds. I think he bench presses a bus. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not fat. I mean, this guy's a solid rock. And he says, "I don't want to leave. I'm safe here."
Yeah.
And I said, I go, "Who's gonna mess with you? I mean, you're just a titan." And he goes, "Rob, I'm this big because I always want to protect myself because I was beat up as a kid and abused." And so that perception of people in our society is one thing, but when you actually, like, these podcasts are great. Once you start hearing the backstory, you go, wait a second. This guy doesn't want to be mean and tough. He wants to protect himself.
Right.
And that's what he's doing. And unfortunately, as a child, that's was put in his brain. Now he's an older man, and he still was feeling that way. And so I ended up working with this gentleman personally. We have case managers, so I don't do very much one-on-one anymore, but worked with him and finally got him to the point where he really started getting to kind of like the genius level of understanding nobody's going to be picking on him. The reality is nobody would come up and try to punch him or get in a fight. And we were able to transition him on. So he had his own place. He had a very nice vehicle, a nice, almost brand new Jeep. His savings went up. His just happiness in life was increased. But that label on people and the culture here, our culture here is really a lot of times is we need to forget about the past, some of the past negative things, and then we keep working at moving them forward. So we're a forward-facing organization.
Yeah, and that leads us also to the success, the numbers. Like you said, you're guided by data. You know, we talked about something like a 1% recidivism rate. You
That's
know,
correct.
so elaborate on that if you would.
Well, you know, when I started, the state's recidivism rate was around 70%. So if
Yeah,
if a person got out of prison within about a year and a half, 70% of them would go back to prison. So to give you a perspective, so
yeah.
if a guy comes here from prison and we have 135 men, I mean, out of the year, we we typically only have maybe two people. Because we always have a rolling enrollment here. So we may have two people that actually go back to prison. It's the culture. In prison, you get labeled with a number. So if you
Right.
talk to anybody that got out of prison, you say, "Hey, what was your number?" They'll recite their number, and that's their identity. And we go, you know what? That identity was in prison. This isn't prison. So you're moving forward. And so our objective is always to get them forward facing and start that culture. The one thing here too is I don't allow violence. I mean, if you're violent, you're out. There's no discussion. And in the early years, I really had to enforce it very, very strictly. And then about 8 years ago, one of the guys said, "You know what, Rob? We watch you deal with the confrontations, and we see you don't like it. The guys don't like it. It's a negative thing. We know you're trying to help us. We're just going to make it, we're just not going to have any more violence in the building." And it's been probably 2 years since there's been a skin to skin contact with
Wow. Yeah.
violence. So it's that culture that you got to really drive home the culture of this is what we stand for, like a brand. This is what we stand for, and this is who we are. And that's what kept really perpetuating with Exodus. And now we're at a point where it just keeps rolling. It's a lot easier now.
And how long are guys typically in the program?
About 9 months. Great question. Now, we have some guys, I'll use me as an example. Let's say I got out of prison, I have a 4-year degree. I get here and I go, you know what? I have some family support staff, or I get 2, 3 jobs and I go, boy, I know what I'm doing. I know what I screwed up on. I have guys that will move out in 3 weeks to a month. I have other guys that are the emotional intelligence is lower, so we're working on it, or their medical condition. So let's say they don't have stabilized medical medication, and so or just different case management. And so we have some guys that are here 5, 6 years, and we review them every month. We have some guys that just the emotional scarring, like when you go homeless, it's we let homeless roll off our tongue pretty easy.
Yeah.
But if you really think about it, when you go homeless and you're camping in a tent, it's not like going to the state park and camping. I mean, you're homeless. You know you have nothing. There's no support system. You're on your own. So there's an emotional scarring. So for those guys, we really have to work with them and help them get through that healing process.
Now that brings up a good, another point, Rob, which is, the social safety net, funding, issues like that. Can you what's going on in Michigan right now in that bigger picture?
Funding the state of Michigan, I don't get into the Republican Democrat thing. We have a Democrat governor, and I have to say I think they're doing an outstanding job right now. It they're really pushing to get more housing in Michigan. They're putting the funding in place to get money to developers, to nonprofits. I do Exodus Place and I still do my commercial development. And we've actually received grants from the state for additional housing and putting up apartment complexes, this summer. So they're actually doing a lot in infrastructure to try to get places for people to stay. As far as a community social net, Exodus, there's a lot of great nonprofits. I just had lunch with a director of it's a 5-house nonprofit. They do basically the same thing, but they're a boutique type of nonprofit,
Mhm.
whereas we're more of like the Walmart, more of a specialized,
Yeah.
and they have more hands-on in reality. And so we send people back and forth because some guys don't work here. So the nonprofits are trying to keep working at creating a safety net. The state of Michigan's doing a good job as far as working to create a safety net for the homeless and at risk of homeless. I mean, there's a lot of people really bouncing on the bottom right now.
That was going to be my next question is what is the breakdown of the people who come to you, the people who find themselves homeless. There's a documentary, I don't know if you've seen it. It was on HBO called American Winter. It was called American Winter, and it was in Portland. It took place in Portland, but this was coming off the recession, maybe within the decade following the recession, and covered those issues of people who had never imagined in a million years they would be homeless. Like they were not people who were on a path toward self-destruction or homelessness. They just found themselves without anything. So what's the atmosphere like now?
We're getting back to that, unfortunately. I just met with a city official yesterday, and he was telling me about one of his children. They're paying for her vehicle, and the grown adult child doesn't want a roommate, but with inflation, with rent going up and food, the father says, "Hey, you're probably going to need to get a roommate because mom and dad can't." We're starting to see mom and dad get into the 50s, 60s, 70s. And then some of these grown children are like, well, it used to be comfortable. Now it's uncomfortable. I don't have enough money because inflation's just really like on food and gas. Uh, I mean, for us right now at Exodus, our food budget it's gone up over 100%. And then our wages have gone up significantly. So everybody's getting tight. And then if like for some of our staff, I've increased our wages with our staff right in the beginning when I started seeing inflation come in. And they said, well, that's awfully nice. You gave me a raise. And I'm like, no, you got to get prepared for it
Yeah.
because it's coming. And if you don't get a raise now, we're going to be behind. And then you're going to start doing payday advances, getting stupid credit card debt, stuff like that. And so we were very aggressive getting ahead of this so we could keep our good quality staff.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I don't know. It's funny because, here I am in my mid 50s and I can't compare it to my parents' experience per se because I wasn't in my mid 50s when they were in their mid 50s or 40. It's like I was a child. So, and I think every generation might feel like it's worse or it's harder or whatever it is. But, the reality is it's harder. It's not better for most people. Certainly middle class or people in even upper middle class or the lower tier of earners. Everybody in that whole segment is not in as good shape as they were. As you manage and also kind of grow Exodus Place, what's on the horizon to possibly extend it into other areas, other
Oh, yeah.
geographical areas.
Well, and we are taking pretty much the Marriott model. Marriott pretty much manages investment groups, hotels, and brands them. And I looked at purchasing or building additional Exodus places to duplicate what we have right here it would be roughly $15 million. So
Yeah.
for us to put the number, and we have 135 men, and right now we're over 500,000 people that are homeless, and it's men and women and children, but the numbers just are so staggering. We couldn't do a capital expansion. So what we're doing is we're putting all of our standard operating procedures into a manual, an online manual that we can eventually be sharing with other organizations, because the nonprofit industry is very, very fragmented. It's kind of like small business, the really micro small businesses for profit. A lot of them are fragmented. You get the
Yeah.
McDonald's, there's a system. I see us being more of a system driven nonprofit that we can share the information. And like I was talking to a executive director this morning doing a coaching call, and explain to them you have to have a solicitation license in the state of Michigan if you're going to ask for donations online. You need to make sure your 990, which is your tax return, completed every year. He's getting a big grant. I said, okay, you need to have a third party CPA or bookkeeper handling it so there's proper tracking of all the funds. You can't just run it out of your checkbook like you used to as a smaller nonprofit. So I think by having a standard operating procedure that we can start sharing with other nonprofits, we can actually start helping encourage, more. What I'd like to do is give the nonprofits more support so they're more sustainable. Because if they go out of business, it really hurts our society. And so I'd rather develop this, give it away, and encourage people to do the right, they have to follow the correct process. They shouldn't be getting closed up from the IRS or the state or a foundation because they didn't handle their books correctly, which was unintentional. They just didn't know. So by having a standard operating procedure, we could share that. And like how you run a board of directors, a lot of people don't know how to run a board of directors.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it's leading to, I think from your perspective, is that the impact overall is what you're focusing on. If there's people in another city, another state that have the wherewithal they have the people power to get stuff done, but they don't have the knowledge or the SOPs, you're more than happy to support them and help them get that stuff squared away. That serves everybody, as you pointed out. The larger issue of humanity, they say, form follows fashion. And, so if people are stressed out, if people's work and life situation is not looked after, then that creates an undercurrent of tension, of crime, of violence, of all these things. Doesn't make for a happy society to have a huge segment of society underdeveloped or underserved. So, but at the same time, there's a lot of polarization, a lot of hatred, a lot of anger in society. So what are your thoughts on enabling humanity and decreasing hate?
Definitely decrease hate. Prior to our, coming live here, was I mentioned, I tease people about Trump and Biden. I said, hey, I'd love to go out for ice cream with Biden. And I think Trump should have been in the basement doing his policies. I mean, we've seen good policies out of him in the humanities side. And I think both presidents there's always good that we can find in humans. And our humanity right now it's so polarized. The homeless, they get labeled. The people coming in from the Mexican border are labeled. Well, I think we need to not demonize people. We need to be working to help them and ask the why. What's the background? We jump to these conclusions and then we write people off. Prisoners re-entering society, write them off. Well, so let's say they get out of prison at 35 and they live to 80 or 100. So the rest of their life, they're in perpetual hell. I mean, I don't think that's showing them a very good humane thing. I mean, for Exodus, we took on the hardest population. Men aren't typically cute. I'd rather donate
Yeah.
puppies, kitties, babies. You see the little babies with cleft teeth or lips, and you go, boy, that's easy to donate to. But I think as humanity goes, if we can start looking at some of the challenging things and really challenge us to think more than, let's say, a 30-second TikTok or Instagram video, and actually start thinking, why is this happening? Like I shared, I thought I was going to be the white knight to the homeless guy. I didn't realize he was the white knight to me. I use
Yeah.
white, and it's not a racial thing, but it's what's going on in that other person's life, so that we can connect with them and hopefully encourage them and help them to have a better life, instead of just being this narcissistic, hey, what's in it for me? And if we can start changing that a little bit, and that's why I'm on podcasts now, is I really want to see our society start getting to the point where how we can start helping others, and then ask the why, the background. I mean, the backgrounds, I mean, when you actually sit there and you find out why somebody did something, I mean, it really it humbles me a lot every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And I think, to go back to your earlier point about judgment, is that, I think we underutilize compassion. We use judgment so readily, and
Hmm.
it's a defense mechanism. It comes from fear. It's a defensive posture, right? Judgment. You'd
You're
think
right.
it's offensive, but it's not. It means that we're insecure. We're judging ourselves in the process, because you can't really judge anybody else without judging them against yourself, which means you're judging yourself. And there's all that stuff. That's all a waste. And then if we open with compassion, there is no downside to compassion, as long as we're, utilizing it. We're trying to make the other person's life better. Our life becomes better in the process. Somebody shows them a kindness, they're now less likely to get over on another person because of their own fear of, like you talked about, the guy who weighs upwards of 300 pounds because he wanted to protect himself. We're all versions of that, beefing ourselves up to protect ourselves from humanity, or from having less, or whatever it is. And then, the whole thing starts to fall apart. So I think that what started as just an impulse on your part to, as you put it, rescue somebody, you know, and then become yourself rescued, is emblematic of the whole concept here, and why I find it so inspiring. Let the audience know. I'll give you the last word. I'll let you share anything you want to about where people can find you, and obviously we'll have it in the show notes. But I encourage listeners to take direction from this in any way they can, on any level that they can draw, direction and inspiration from it. But Rob, thank you so much. But yeah, share a final thought and how to reach you.
Well, thank you. Well, you kind of summed it up. My focus is show love and compassion, and give it abundantly, and don't worry about a return, because not everybody's going to say thank you. You can give it just freely, and not worry about that acknowledgement. The way to get a hold of me would be go to exodusplace.org, and then you can just fill out, a person can fill out our contact information, and the email gets forwarded to me through my staff. And yeah, I'm always willing to help other people. I'm really encouraged with, like this podcast, what you stand for, and what we can do together to make a difference in other people's lives.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.